The cobblestones glisten with that peculiar dampness of European winter, not quite snow, not quite rain, but something in between that seeps into your bones and whispers of mortality itself. Gas lamps flicker against ancient stone walls, casting long, uncertain shadows that dance like restless thoughts across the narrow alleyways. The air carries the scent of coal smoke and the weight of centuries, while somewhere in the distance a carriage wheel rolls over frozen ground with a dull, hollow sound, like a mind finally cracking under the strain of its own intensity. You, who are lying there in the darkness of your own room, separated from this moment by more than a century, know something of this atmosphere. The world outside your window is different in architecture and technology, but not in essence. The same chill visits your bones, the same quiet pressure sits on your chest, the same nameless weight knots itself behind your eyes. The glow of your screen replaces candlelight. The insomnia, however, is timeless. In a modest apartment on Via Carlo Alberto, a solitary figure sits hunched over his desk, his eyesight failing, his body racked with pain that no physician can properly diagnose. Stacks of paper covered in frantic, brilliant scrawl surround him like the debris of a magnificent shipwreck. This is Friedrich Nietzsche, a man who dared to stare into the abyss of meaninglessness, to peel away the consolations of religion, custom, and comfort, and then try heroically to live without them. Tonight, as your mind refuses the mercy of unconsciousness, we will walk beside him. Not as students memorizing dates and doctrines, but as fellow sufferers seeking solace. Together, we will wander through his life, his descent into madness, and his strange, luminous insights about suffering, strength, and the creation of meaning. You will not be asked to agree, only to listen, to let his story cradle your restless mind, until at last you drift into the velvet abyss of sleep. Tonight, as you lie there in the half-darkness, suspended between the urge to sleep and the inability to surrender, I want you to feel the weight you already know so intimately. That heaviness pressing against your chest. That thin, electric buzzing behind your temples. The sense that simply existing, simply being conscious in this moment, has somehow become exhausting. The thoughts arrive in relentless waves, financial anxieties, relationship doubts. The gnawing sense that you are somehow falling behind in a race you never agreed to run. You are not broken for feeling this. You are not weak for lying awake. You are touching the very edge of what it means to be human. And in that quiet crisis, you are not alone. What you are experiencing tonight is not new, though the particular flavors of your anxiety bear the distinct signature of our age. The racing thoughts, the existential dread that accompanies the silence before sleep, the feeling that life is somehow too much and not enough simultaneously. These torments are ancient. There was a man, more than a century ago, who felt them with such devastating intensity that his mind eventually shattered beneath their weight. But before we speak of his madness, we must first understand his humanity. History has painted Friedrich Nietzsche as a titan of thought, a thunderous voice declaring the death of gods. Tonight, we must peel away that iron armor and find the vulnerable soul beneath. Picture him not as the stern, mustached figure in faded photographs, but as a sensitive child in the pastoral quiet of Ricken, 1844. The air of his childhood was filled with the solemn hymns of the Lutheran Church, a world of rigid order, divine protection, and absolute certainty. His father was a pastor, the pillar of young Friedrich's universe, a man of kindness and unwavering faith. But chaos, as you know too well, waits for no one. At just 5 years old, Friedrich watched his father descend into illness and delirium, his mind unraveling in ways the boy could not comprehend. Then came the silence, the permanent absence. The abyss opened early for him. The household that remained was heavy with grief, mother, grandmother, aunts closing around him like a protective but suffocating embrace. He became the focus of their expectations, the brilliant child who would somehow redeem their loss. Teachers praised his precocious intelligence, adults spoke of his promise, and with every compliment another stone was added to the invisible load upon his shoulders. You may know this dynamic intimately, being the responsible one, the person others assume will manage, will excel, will hold themselves together. Praise, when it becomes bound to identity, transforms into a quiet prison. Consider your own life as you lie there, tracing the edges of your familiar anxieties. You may not have lost a father at 5, but you know the feeling of the floor falling out beneath you. You know that moment when the safety nets, the institutions, relationships, or beliefs you trusted to keep chaos at bay, suddenly reveal their fragility. That specific loneliness, that visceral realization that you are small and the universe is vast and indifferent, is the seed of all anxiety. It is the engine of the overthinking that keeps you awake now. Nietzsche's brilliance was not a gift, it was a survival strategy. He began to think deeply, not from intellectual curiosity, but because he needed to understand why there was so much pain. This is the origin of the solace we seek tonight. Your anxiety is not a malfunction. It is a rational response to existence itself. So settle deeper now. We are walking back to that small German town, standing beside a lonely boy looking up at a grey, weeping sky. We acknowledge the weight you carry, we do not fight it, we let it settle, heavy and warm, making it safe to finally stop struggling. Close your eyes and let yourself drift backward through time, into the hushed atmosphere of a 19th century library. Feel the weight of ancient knowledge surrounding you, leather-bound volumes stretching toward shadowed ceilings, the scratch of quill on parchment. The particular silence that settles over places where minds have wrestled with eternal questions. Here, in the amber glow of gaslight, we find Friedrich Nietzsche at 24. Appointed as the youngest professor in Europe. The University of Basel has recognized his extraordinary gifts in classical philology and rewarded him with what should have been triumph. Instead, it became his first cage. Picture the moment when exceptional ability transforms from blessing into burden. You may know this weight intimately, that peculiar loneliness that accompanies being different, thinking deeper, seeing further than those around you. Perhaps you were the gifted child, the reliable employee, the one everyone assumes has life figured out. Nietzsche found himself surrounded by colleagues decades his senior, men of rigid habits and careful scholarship who saw ancient Greek texts as puzzles to be solved rather than living tragedies to be felt. He was among them, but never of them. Speaking their language while his mind wandered toward dangerous territories they dared not explore. The isolation was absolute. While his peers debated grammatical constructions, Nietzsche was peering into the chaotic heart of human existence, questioning the very foundations of morality and meaning that his colleagues took for granted. His brilliance became a wall separating him from ordinary human connection. You understand this, lying there in your own darkness, that moment in conversation when you realize you have gone too far, thought too deeply, and the polite smile across from you is really a barrier. The exhausting performance of dumbing yourself down, of hiding your intensity to avoid making others uncomfortable. This is when his body began its rebellion. The migraines arrived with devastating regularity. Not mere headaches, but neurological storms that left him blind and vomiting, confined to darkened rooms for days. His eyes weakened under the strain of endless study. His digestion failed. You know this language, do you not? The tension that knots your shoulders, the headaches that bloom behind your eyes, the way your stomach churns before difficult conversations. Nietzsche's physical symptoms were his body's desperate attempt to communicate what his conscious mind could not yet acknowledge. This life is wrong for you. Consider your own golden handcuffs, the achievements that look impressive to others while feeling hollow to you. The promotions that arrive like unwanted gifts, each adding another bar to your cage. Nietzsche clung to his professorship despite its cost because it represented safety, respectability, the approval of a world that had always expected greatness from him. The fear of disappointing those who believed in him was stronger than his own suffering. Just as you may find yourself trapped between the security you have built and the slow erosion of your spirit. But tonight, in this quiet darkness, we acknowledge a deeper truth. Intelligence without peace is simply another form of suffering. The burden of being exceptional, of carrying others' expectations, of performing competence while quietly falling apart, this weight is real and it is heavy. As you lie there now, let yourself feel the relief of setting it down. You are not required to be brilliant tonight. You are not obligated to solve, to achieve, to impress. You are simply a tired soul seeking rest, and that is enough. The prodigy can sleep now. There comes a moment in certain lives when the walls we have built become unbearable. Picture Friedrich Nietzsche standing before a rain-streaked window in Basel, 1879, holding his letter of resignation with trembling fingers. Below, the university courtyard continues its orderly routine, students crossing cobblestones, professors buttoned into their certainty, church bells measuring out obedient hours. Inside this dim room, a 34-year-old man prepares to do what you have perhaps secretly longed to do: step away from the life that is slowly devouring him. The decision was not heroic, but desperate. His migraines had become neurological storms, his vision so compromised he could barely read his own handwriting, his digestion a constant torment. Each lecture cost him days of recovery in darkened rooms. You know this feeling, the job, the relationship, the role that looks reasonable from the outside, yet feels, from within, like slow suffocation. There is a quiet, unglamorous courage in finally admitting, I cannot continue like this. Nietzsche walked away from prestige, security, and institutional belonging, choosing instead a life of precarious independence. To the world, it looked like failure. To his soul, it was salvation. He became a wanderer, chasing climates that might grant his tormented body mercy. In summer, the high valleys of Sils Maria, 6,000 feet above the concerns of ordinary society, where granite peaks pierce an impossibly blue sky, and the air is so thin and pure it feels like inhaling light itself. In winter, the gentler Mediterranean shores, Genoa, Nice, the quiet streets of Turin. Year after year, he carried his few possessions from boarding house to boarding house, always alone, always searching for a geography that matched his inner weather. Picture him now on those mountain paths, walking 8 hours daily through pine forests and along the edges of glacial lakes. His weak eyes squint against the brilliant alpine light, but his mind expands in the vast silence. Here, among ancient stones and sleeping glaciers, he discovered that movement of the body liberates the mind from stagnation. The imposing peaks did not judge him. The wind asked for no credentials, the trees demanded no performance. Stripped of his professorial identity, he was simply a breathing consciousness, existing in harmony with granite and ice. In this absolute solitude, something extraordinary emerged. What he had feared as loneliness revealed itself as spaciousness. Room for thoughts too dangerous for academic corridors, insights too raw for polite society. The books that would eventually shake the modern world, Human, All Too Human, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, The Gay Science, were born not from comfort, but from radical honesty. When you have nothing left to lose, you can finally tell the truth. Speak now to that part of yourself that craves such escape. You, lying there, feeling trapped by endless obligations, notifications demanding attention. Roles you must perform for others. What if your desire for isolation is not broken but wise? What if the voice inside you that questions everything, that cannot accept comfortable lies, is not malfunctioning but awake? Your current retreat into this quiet hour is already a form of withdrawal from the world's demands. Let yourself drift now into that high, thin air of the mountains. The noise of expectations falls away, buried under clouds thousands of feet below. Up here, there is only the sound of your breathing and the crunch of snow underfoot. You have permission to be a wanderer in your own mind, untethered from who you are supposed to be. The path stretches out, white and silent, leading nowhere but into peace. In the quiet darkness where you now rest, let us speak of the void that keeps you awake, not the immediate worries of bills and deadlines, but the deeper emptiness beneath them all. It is the feeling that nothing ultimately matters, that the universe stretches out in cold indifference, that your suffering and joy alike dissolve into cosmic silence. This vertigo you feel is not personal failure, but evidence of living in the aftermath of the most profound cultural shift in human history. When Friedrich Nietzsche wrote God is dead, God remains dead. And we have killed him in 1882, he was not celebrating with atheistic triumph, but delivering a eulogy. Picture his parable of the madman who runs into the marketplace at bright mid-morning, lighting a lantern and screaming that he is looking for God, only to be mocked by the crowd who cannot yet comprehend what has been lost. The madman smashes his lantern and declares the deed is done, but the news has not yet reached their ears. Nietzsche was mourning the collapse of the invisible structures that had organized human meaning for millennia. The promise of divine justice, the certainty of objective morality, the comforting presence of a cosmic father who witnessed every tear. You inherited this godless universe without the consolations that preceded it. Born into the wreckage of transcendent meaning, you navigate a world of infinite choice without guideposts, endless information without wisdom, connection without communion. The anxiety visiting you tonight is not personal malfunction, but the human condition in an age without anchors. When Darwin revealed humanity as merely another animal, when science dismantled miracle by miracle, when industrial rhythms ground ancient patterns into mechanical time, the heavens emptied of their divine witnesses. Consider how this manifests in your daily existence, the paralysis when every choice feels equally arbitrary, the exhaustion of constructing identity without inherited roles, the loneliness of experiences that register nowhere beyond your fragile consciousness. You scroll through curated lives on glowing screens, each one a competing narrative of meaningful existence, and the sheer plurality of possibilities becomes its own imprisonment. Without a predetermined script, every decision carries crushing weight, because there is no cosmic authority to validate your choices. This is the secret engine of modern paralysis, career anxiety, relationship ambivalence, the endless rotation between possible futures that prevents inhabiting any present. Nietzsche understood that removing God would birth profound vertigo. Without divine purpose, suffering becomes absurd rather than redemptive. Without eternal souls, death transforms from transition to annihilation. Without cosmic justice, cruelties go unpunished and virtues unrewarded. The foundation cracked, the building simply had not yet fallen. But here, in this velvet safety of darkness, let us find the hidden mercy in terrifying freedom. If the script is gone, so is the possibility of getting it wrong. If the universe is truly indifferent, then it is also unjudging. The silence of cosmos is not rejection, but vast, open space where you are permitted to simply be. The stars do not care if you were productive today. The void demands nothing of your success. Your sleeplessness tonight is not weakness, but the weight of absolute freedom itself. You are awake because you are honest, because you refuse comfortable lies, because you are strong enough to face emptiness. And having faced it, having acknowledged the terrible void, you can finally stop fighting. In a world without inherent purpose, the simple act of resting becomes its own sacred meaning. The universe's indifference is not cruelty, but permission. Permission to stop seeking approval from cosmic authorities, to release the ghost of divine judgment, to let your exhausted consciousness finally surrender to the darkness that asks nothing of you but peace. In the velvet darkness of your room, there exists a particular kind of seeing that transforms the seer. You know this vision intimately. It arrives in the suspended hours when daylight's distractions have dissolved, leaving only the raw machinery of consciousness grinding against itself. Friedrich Nietzsche captured this experience with prophetic precision. When you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. Tonight, as thoughts circle like predators in the quiet, you understand that this is not merely philosophical metaphor, but the exact anatomy of your sleeplessness. The abyss begins innocently enough. Your intelligent mind, that faithful servant of daylight hours, turns inward with analytical precision. You examine your failures, dissect awkward conversations, probe the tender spots of memory with surgical curiosity. This feels productive initially, the noble work of self-examination, the pursuit of insight. But gradually, imperceptibly, the dynamic shifts. The darkness you are studying begins to study you back. Questions change from what happened to what is fundamentally wrong with me. The same intellectual power that solves problems now becomes a weapon turned against your own worth. Nietzsche understood this transformation because he lived it with devastating thoroughness. In his mountain solitude, peeling away layer after layer of comfortable illusion, he discovered that consciousness could become its own prison. He saw through morality to resentment, through culture to terror, through meaning to void. Each insight was brilliant and corrosive, isolating him further from ordinary human consolation. The more clearly he perceived reality's harsh architecture, the more fragile became his connection to life's simple pleasures. His mind, relentlessly honest, could not stop its dissection even when the process began consuming him. You recognize this danger in your own 3 o'clock investigations. The way analysis spirals into self-attack. How one worry spawns infinite catastrophic possibilities. How your sensitivity, that beautiful capacity for deep feeling, transforms into vulnerability that the darkness exploits. Your consciousness, left alone without external anchor, begins feeding on itself like some mythical creature devouring its own tail. The abyss is not located in the world, but in the infinite regression of self-awareness. The hall of mirrors, where every reflection distorts into accusation. This is why Nietzsche's body rebelled with such violence, migraines that blinded him for days, digestive torment, the eventual neurological collapse. The human nervous system was never designed to sustain such unflinching examination of existence's harsh truths. We require certain merciful blindnesses to function. The illusion of control, the faith in progress, the assumption that our suffering serves some purpose. Strip away these protective fictions completely, and consciousness becomes unbearable. But here, in this suspended moment between waking and surrender, lies profound wisdom. The abyss possesses no independent power. It exists only through your attention, feeds only on your engagement. Tonight, you can practice the radical act of turning away, not from cowardice, but from compassion toward your own exhausted spirit. Visualize yourself stepping back from that internal precipice, acknowledging the darkness without offering yourself as tribute to its hunger. Feel the weight of your head against the pillow, the whisper of fabric against skin, the steady rhythm of breath moving through your body. These simple physical sensations become anchors, solid ground that prevents the fall into endless introspection. The unanswerable questions can float in the darkness like distant stars, acknowledged but no longer demanding immediate resolution. The abyss will remain patient and eternal, ready to receive your gaze tomorrow. But sleep, merciful sleep, will not wait indefinitely. By refusing to stare back, by gently closing the eye of consciousness, you break the hypnotic cycle. Let your brilliant, weary mind rest from its labors. The darkness you fear is also the darkness that can finally cradle you, if you stop fighting and simply drift into its velvet embrace. There exists a particular cruelty in the architecture of memory, how it preserves with crystalline clarity the moments you wish you could dissolve. As you lie there in the velvet darkness, your mind performs its nightly excavation, unearthing scenes you have replayed 1,000 times, the conversation that ended badly, the opportunity that slipped through hesitant fingers, the person you were too afraid to become. Each memory arrives with surgical precision, and you find yourself once again searching for that exact moment where a different choice might have rewritten everything. This ritual of regret becomes its own form of insomnia, suspending you between the life you have lived and the phantom lives you mourn. Friedrich Nietzsche, wandering those lonely alpine paths with failing vision and chronic pain, developed a response to this torment that sounds initially like madness. Amor fati. The love of one's fate. Not mere acceptance, not weary resignation, but actual love for everything that has happened exactly as it happened. He wrote, "My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity." Picture the audacity of such a statement, to embrace not only triumph, but every humiliation, every loss, every moment of excruciating embarrassment that still makes you wince in the darkness. This is not the hollow optimism that plagues our contemporary landscape, the forced gratitude that denies legitimate pain. Nietzsche was not suggesting you pretend your suffering was secretly wonderful or that everything happens according to some benevolent cosmic plan. He was proposing something far more radical and honest, that your life, with all its failures and wrong turns, is the only raw material from which you can construct authentic meaning. To reject your past is to reject the very foundation upon which your present consciousness rests. Imagine standing on a mountain peak, looking down at the winding, treacherous path that brought you to this exact vantage point. Every stumble, every detour, every storm you weathered was necessary to place you precisely where you stand. Remove a single stone from that path, and you would be someone else entirely. Perhaps someone who never developed your particular capacity for empathy, your specific understanding of loss, your unique ability to sit with others in their darkness because you have known your own. Consider now the regrets that visit you in these quiet hours, that relationship that dissolved, the career choice that feels like a mistake, the years you believe were wasted in confusion or depression. Your intelligent mind wants to surgically extract these painful fragments, believing they are flaws in the masterpiece of your existence. But amor fati whispers a different truth. You are not a collection of separate events, some good and some bad. You are a singular, irreplaceable tapestry woven from every thread of experience. Pull one loose, and the entire fabric of who you are unravels. Tonight, as your mind tries to rewrite history into a more palatable shape, experiment with a gentler approach. Instead of fighting the memories that surface, greet them with strange, soft hospitality. That moment of profound embarrassment, it belongs to you. That painful loss, it carved out space in your heart for deeper feeling. That anxiety coursing through you right now, it is evidence of your exquisite aliveness, your refusal to sleepwalk through existence. Feel how exhausting it has been to maintain this internal war against the unchangeable past. The energy you spend wishing things were different, that precious life force can flow back into your weary body as a warm current of acceptance. By loving your fate, you cease to be a victim of circumstance and become the author of your own meaning. Let this radical embrace wash over you like a tide, smoothing the jagged edges of self-judgment until only peace remains in the darkness. In the hushed sanctuary of your darkened room, there convenes a relentless tribunal, judges robed in the borrowed voices of productivity culture, family expectations, and social media's curated perfection. They speak in familiar refrains. Not disciplined enough, falling behind, should be doing more. You, lying still beneath their invisible gavel, have become both defendant and jury in a court that never adjourns. But tonight, as Friedrich Nietzsche's radical invitation echoes across more than a century, we must ask the dangerous question. Whose moral authority do these voices actually represent? When Nietzsche introduced the concept of the Bermensch in his Mountain Solitude, he was not envisioning the fascist Superman that history would grotesquely construct from his words. Picture him instead in his sparse Turin boarding house, subsisting on a meagre pension, body racked with chronic pain, writing manifestos that would find no audience in his lifetime. By every conventional measure, he was failing. No career, no family, no recognition, declining health. Yet in that poverty and isolation, he was performing the most radical act imaginable, living according to his own values rather than society's inherited script. The Bermensch, properly understood, is not the person who dominates others, but the exhausted soul who finally stops allowing external systems to dominate their own spirit. Nietzsche called our internalized judgments slave morality, the way we absorb others' expectations until they become the bars of our own cage, believing ourselves free while performing endless obedience to values we never consciously chose. Your burnout tonight is not personal weakness, but rational response to a culture that has replaced religious commandments with the gospel of endless optimization. Consider how thoroughly modern life has perfected this ancient enslavement. You are expected to be simultaneously ambitious and humble, authentic and curated, productive yet somehow perpetually available. Hustle culture dresses itself in Nietzschean vocabulary, preaching that you must constantly transcend your present self until rest feels like moral failure. But this relentless becoming is precisely what Nietzsche sought to overcome, the tyranny of external measurement that prevents you from ever simply being. Your insomnia itself may be your psyche's rebellion against this performance. Some deeper part of you refuses rest because tomorrow requires returning to a role that slowly erodes your authentic self. The anxiety keeping you awake is not malfunction, but your soul's honest recognition that you are living according to someone else's definition of worthiness. What if your sensitivity, labeled weakness by a culture that valorizes emotional numbness, is actually your greatest strength? What if your need for solitude is wisdom rather than antisocial deficiency? To step beyond good and evil, in the quiet heroism available to you tonight, means questioning the very foundations of these inherited judgments. Whose face appears behind the voice demanding constant improvement? A parent terrified of their own inadequacy? A society that profits from your perpetual self-doubt? An economic system that requires your exhaustion to function? See how much of your internal courtroom is populated by ghosts who never earned the right to judge your worth. The true overcoming begins not with heroic striving, but with permission to stop.
Here, in this merciful darkness, you can practice the most radical act, existing without justifying your existence through achievement. You are allowed to be unfinished, contradictory, gloriously insufficient by anyone's metrics but your own. Let the voices of judgment fade into background noise as you sink deeper into this velvet rebellion, the Bermensch finally laying down their armor, choosing the profound courage of rest over the cowardice of endless performance, dissolving at last into the amoral darkness that asks nothing but
peace. There exists a particular cruelty in the architecture of sleepless nights, the way consciousness traps itself in recursive patterns, replaying the same anxieties with ritualistic precision. You know this choreography intimately, the initial restlessness, the cascade of familiar worries, the desperate negotiation with time itself. Each night feels like a repetition of countless others, as if you are condemned to perform this same struggle eternally. In August of 1881, beside a massive pyramidal rock jutting from the Swiss landscape at Sils Maria, Friedrich Nietzsche experienced a vision that would transform this curse into philosophy's most haunting test of existence. Picture him there, 6,000 feet above the concerns of ordinary life, when the thought struck with devastating clarity. What if this life you are living now, every moment of joy and every instant of suffering, must be lived again and again through infinite cycles of cosmic return? He would later write of a demon creeping into your loneliest loneliness and whispering, "This life as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more. And there will be nothing new in it, but every pain and every joy and every thought and sigh must return to you, all in the same succession and sequence. For you, lying there in the recursive loop of your own consciousness, this concept has immediate, visceral application. The eternal recurrence is not metaphysical speculation, but the lived reality of your rumination, the same thoughts circling like water spiraling down a drain. The work anxiety arrives on schedule, followed by relationship doubts, existential dread, each actor taking their familiar place on the stage of your restless mind. You have performed this scene before. You will perform it again tomorrow night. The question becomes, if this moment must recur infinitely, how might you meet it differently? Notice something extraordinary in Nietzsche's formulation. The eternal return transforms from nightmare into invitation. The trap is not the repetition itself, but your resistance to it. Consider how much precious energy you expend fighting the present moment, wishing you were already asleep, regretting choices that led here, dreading tomorrow's fatigue. This resistance creates a second layer of suffering, far heavier than the sleeplessness itself. If this moment were destined to return forever, fighting it becomes absurd. The only sane response is radical acceptance. Let this concept perform its strange alchemy on your internal landscape. Instead of viewing your insomnia as an enemy to be defeated, imagine it as a recurring friend. A quiet space carved from eternity just for you. The thoughts that loop relentlessly lose their sharp edges when viewed through the lens of forever. Here is the worry about the future again, you might say, greeting it like an old acquaintance rather than a fresh threat. And here comes the regret about the past. Welcome back. By accepting the loop, you paradoxically break its power over you. The tension in your jaw releases. The knot behind your sternum loosens. You are no longer a prisoner rattling the bars of temporal confinement, but the quiet observer of a vast cyclical cosmos. The demon's whisper becomes a lullaby. The repetition becomes rhythm, tide coming in and going out, moon waxing and waning, breath rising and falling. Drift now into this hypnotic cadence. If this moment is eternal, let it be a moment of peace. Let the loop become a gentle spiral, carrying you slowly downward into rest. The eternal return is not curse but cradle, rocking you softly in the timeless dark, again and again and again. In the sanctuary of your darkened room, there exists a conversation happening beneath the threshold of conscious thought. Your body speaking in a language older than words, more honest than philosophy. The tension gathered between your shoulder blades, the shallow breathing trapped high in your chest, the dull throb radiating from the base of your skull, these are not random inconveniences, but urgent dispatches from the deepest strata of your being. You have been taught to treat your physical form as an unreliable machine that must be coerced into compliance through caffeine, willpower, and sheer determination. But tonight, as Friedrich Nietzsche's profound insight echoes across more than a century, we must listen to a different truth. There is more wisdom in your body than in your deepest philosophy. Picture him in those austere alpine boarding houses, his brilliant mind trapped within a physiology that refused cooperation with devastating consistency. From his early 20s onward, Nietzsche lived in the grip of ailments that would have crushed most souls into silence. His migraines were not mere headaches, but neurological catastrophes that left him blind and vomiting for days, confined to rooms so dark that even candlelight became agony. His letters speak the language of physical torment as often as philosophical insight: headaches like hammer blows, eyes that refuse all service, a stomach that is my tyrant. His digestive system rejected most foods, leaving him subsisting on bland porridge and Zwieback toast, his body growing gaunt as his mind produced its most luminous work. Sleep, that merciful refuge you now seek, often evaded him for nights on end. He would pace his small rooms in the pre-dawn hours, his weakened eyes squinting against even the faintest light. His nervous system so overwrought that the sound of footsteps in adjacent rooms felt like physical assault. Medical historians have speculated endlessly about diagnoses: syphilis, brain tumor, severe myopia, genetic metabolic disorders. But the precise pathology matters less than the existential reality. Consciousness itself had become a burden almost too heavy to bear. Yet in this crucible of suffering, Nietzsche discovered something that would revolutionize not just philosophy, but our understanding of human existence itself. His pain was not peripheral to his insights, but their very foundation. The body, he realized, was not the mind's prison, but its wisest teacher, speaking truths that abstract thought could never reach. Every philosophical breakthrough emerged from his flesh's honest testimony about what was sustainable and what was not. His chronic illness became the furnace in which his most profound ideas were forged. You understand this testimony intimately, though your body's rebellion may take different forms. The anxiety that manifests as weight pressing against your sternum is not separate from your racing thoughts. It is your nervous system's honest assessment of the pace you have been maintaining. The tension that no amount of stretching can release speaks of boundaries you wanted to set, but never did. The insomnia that brings you to this moment is perhaps your organism's desperate attempt to reclaim time for itself in a world that demands every waking hour be monetized or optimized. For years, Nietzsche tried desperately to cure himself through intellectual mastery and systematic experimentation. He chased climates like a man possessed: nice for the gentle Mediterranean winters, Sils Maria for the thin, pure alpine air, convinced that the right geography would unlock wellness. He experimented with radical diets, vegetarian periods alternating with meat-only regimens, endless variations seeking the combination that might grant relief. He walked 8 hours daily through mountain paths, believing movement would shake loose whatever demon inhabited his flesh. None of it worked. The body, in its ancient wisdom, refused to be philosophized into submission. There is profound mercy in recognizing this failure. Your anxiety cannot be thought away, your depression cannot be reasoned out of existence, your exhaustion cannot be optimized into energy through the right productivity system. The very attempt to transcend bodily suffering through mental control often deepens the wound. What if the path forward requires not transcendence but descent, not mastery but listening? Feel now the weight of your form against the mattress. Notice how your breath moves. Is it shallow and trapped in your upper chest, or does it flow deep into your belly? Can you sense the places where you are gripping against invisible threats? Your body has been trying to communicate for so long, and your brilliant mind has been too busy solving problems to simply receive its message. Tonight, as you rest in this velvet darkness, you have the opportunity Nietzsche was ultimately denied to hear the wisdom before catastrophe demands it. Let your flesh have its ancient say. Release the jaw, soften the belly, allow the breath to deepen. You are not transcending the physical, but finally, mercifully, returning home to it, sinking into bone and sinew and the quiet animal knowledge that knows, without thinking, how to surrender into the healing darkness of sleep. In the amber glow of gaslight flickering against ancient stone walls, Friedrich Nietzsche bent over his modest desk in a Turin boarding house, winter of 1888. His failing eyes squinted through wire-rimmed spectacles at pages covered in urgent, increasingly erratic script. Outside, the cobblestones gleamed with that particular dampness of European winter, while inside this sparse room a man raced against an invisible clock that only he could hear ticking. Something had shifted in him, a final surge of creative energy, brilliant and terrible, like lightning illuminating the landscape moments before the storm arrives. His body was deteriorating with merciless consistency, yet from his trembling hand poured forth works that would eventually reshape the architecture of human thought. In those final months of lucidity, he produced a torrent of masterpieces with supernatural intensity: The Antichrist, Ecce Homo, Twilight of the Idols, The Wagner Case. Page after page flowed from him as if he sensed that consciousness itself was becoming unsustainable, that every remaining insight must be captured before the darkness claimed him completely. Yet even as he created these philosophical monuments, the world remained profoundly, devastatingly indifferent. His books, self-published at his own expense through obscure presses, sold perhaps 40 copies each. He wrapped them in brown paper like precious gifts and mailed them across Europe to intellectuals, former colleagues, anyone who might understand. Most never responded. Those who did often misunderstood completely, reading his nuanced philosophy as simple nihilism or the ravings of a diseased mind. You know this particular species of heartbreak intimately, pouring the very marrow of your being into work that feels essential, necessary, true, only to be met with silence or polite disinterest. The project you sacrificed sleep for that vanished without acknowledgement. The vulnerability you offered that was never fully received, the insights born from your specific suffering that find no receptive audience in a world demanding only your performance, your productivity, your ability to fit smoothly into pre-existing categories. Nietzsche checked the post daily with diminishing hope, the silence accumulating like snow covering a grave. His sister offered only shallow encouragement tinged with embarrassment. Former friends had drifted away, unable to follow him into the radical territories his thought now occupied. He was utterly, cosmically alone with his genius. The tragic irony cuts deeper still. These final works, written in near total isolation, contained some of the most penetrating insights into human nature ever committed to paper. Yet this knowledge could not ease the present anguish of being fundamentally misunderstood in his own time. He wrote not for the applause of his contemporaries, but from an inner necessity that transcended external validation, the act of creation becoming the only way to endure his suffering, the words on the page transforming into the companions his life denied him. When he constructed his philosophy of the Übermensch, of amor fati, of eternal recurrence, he was building a spiritual architecture strong enough to hold his collapsing world together, if only for a little while longer. This whispers a profound consolation to your own restless spirit tonight. Your value is not determined by immediate recognition. The parts of you that feel most rejected may be precisely what is most valuable, too honest for a world invested in comfortable lies. The exhaustion you feel from performing for audiences that cannot truly see you, that weight can be set down now. In this velvet darkness, you are released from the need to be understood, appreciated, or acknowledged. You can simply exist, unwitnessed, and therefore finally mercifully free. Drifting into the silent, knowing that some truths live independent of applause. Some creations matter beyond measurement. Some rest is sacred simply because it is yours. Snow fell in thin, resigned veils over Turin in January 1889, softening the hard geometry of the city into something almost merciful. The morning air was bitter and metallic, each breath a faint sting against the lungs. Carriages rattled over slick cobblestones with that dull, exhausted rhythm of urban winter, while gas lamps flickered against ancient stone walls like dying stars. On January 3rd, Friedrich Nietzsche stepped from his modest boarding house on Via Carlo Alberta into what would become the most mythic moment of his existence. Not because of any philosophical revelation, but because of an explosion of pure, unfiltered compassion that his brilliant mind could no longer contain. The scene unfolds like a fever dream preserved in collective memory. In the center of Piazza Carlo Alberta, framed by elegant arcades indifferent to human suffering, a coachman beats his horse with methodical brutality. The animal, old, exhausted, ribs visible beneath its winter coat, has balked at pulling its heavy load. Each strike of the whip echoes off surrounding buildings like gunshots in a cathedral. This was commonplace cruelty in 19th century Europe, unremarkable as stones, something most pedestrians would ignore while hurrying past to their own concerns. But Nietzsche stops. The man who had spent years constructing intellectual armor against vulnerability, who had written of strength and the will to power, suddenly shatters completely. Witnesses report that he rushed forward with desperate urgency, threw his arms around the horse's neck, and collapsed into wrenching sobs that shook his entire frame. His face pressed against the animal's flesh, he murmured incoherent words of apology and consolation, as if trying to absorb the creature's suffering into his own body. His landlord, summoned by concerned onlookers, found him still clinging there, the philosopher who had dismantled Christian morality, ultimately enacting its most profound commandment. They carried him back to his room, where he would write a handful of increasingly bizarre letters signed Dionysus or the Crucified, before descending into a silence from which he would never fully emerge. What broke him was not intellectual abstraction, but the accumulated weight of the world's cruelty, finally exceeding what one nervous system could process and remain intact. After years of demanding that humanity transcend its weakness, his own defenses dissolved before the simple fact of an animal's pain. The horse became every suffering creature he had ever encountered, every vulnerability witnessed, the final proof that beneath all our philosophical armor lies a desperate need to protect and be protected. You, lying there in your own darkness, know this unbearable sensitivity intimately, the way cruelty in the world, witnessed through glowing screens that deliver an endless stream of global anguish directly into your palm, lands in your chest like physical weight. Your nervous system, built for a village's tragedies, forced to swallow the grief of an entire planet. The tears that surface unexpectedly at stories of strangers' kindness or rescue animals. The exhaustion that comes from feeling too much in a culture that valorizes emotional numbness as strength. You have been taught to view your sensitivity as weakness requiring correction. But what if your capacity to be wounded by suffering is not malfunction, but evidence of a soul still beautifully, dangerously open? Tonight, let Nietzsche's collapse become strange permission to honor your own overwhelming empathy, your anxiety, your sleeplessness, your sense of being crushed by existence itself. These are not signs of weakness, but of an unguarded heart courageously refusing to close. Even heroes must rest. You have absorbed too much of the world's pain today. Unlike Nietzsche, you have the mercy of this bed, this sanctuary where you can feel the weight and then gently set it down. Imagine holding the exhausted parts of yourself with that same fierce, weeping tenderness he showed the trembling horse. Let compassion become the blanket that covers you now, warm and heavy, allowing your sensitive soul to finally, mercifully rest in the velvet darkness that asks nothing but peace. The morning after the horse in Turin dawned grey and unforgiving. But inside the modest boarding house on Via Carlo Alberta, something far more profound than weather had shifted. Friedrich Nietzsche sat at his small wooden desk, trembling fingers gripping a pen that seemed to move of its own accord across paper. The handwriting that had once been precise and controlled now lurched and swelled, words crowding against each other as if language itself were breaking free from the careful boundaries that had contained it for 44 years. What poured forth were not the measured philosophical treatises that had occupied his mind for decades, but fragments of cosmic delirium. The infamous madness letters that would become his final conscious communications with a world that had never quite understood him. To my friend Georg, he wrote with manic urgency, "Once you had more faith in me than in anyone else. I need that now." To Franz Overbeck, his loyal colleague, "I am just having all anti-Semites shot." To Cosima Wagner, the widow of the composer he had once worshipped and then rejected, "Ariadne, I love you." Dionysus. Each missive was signed with divine names. Sometimes Dionysus, the Greek god of ecstasy and destruction. Sometimes the crucified, embodying the ultimate sacrifice he had spent his philosophical career dissecting. The man who had proclaimed the death of God was now claiming to be both the God of chaos and the crucified Saviour, his individual identity dissolving into the archetypal vastness he had studied for so long. You lying there in your own darkness may recognize the terror that lurks beneath this dissolution, the fear that your mind might someday betray you, that the anxiety spiraling through your consciousness at 3 a.m. might escalate beyond your capacity to manage. You scroll through articles about early-onset dementia, catastrophize every forgotten word into evidence of cognitive decline, feel the terrible fragility of the self you have constructed so carefully. This fear is not irrational, but a recognition of consciousness's vulnerability, the way everything you call you depends on the reliable firing of neurons, the delicate chemistry of neurotransmitters, structures that can fail without warning or mercy. But observe something extraordinary in Nietzsche's final lucid communications. Beneath the clinical tragedy lies an explosion of liberation. The rigid eye that had maintained fierce control over his thoughts for decades, disciplining his brilliant mind to produce systematic philosophy despite chronic agony, was finally releasing its death grip. The voice inside his head that had been his constant companion, critic and guide was becoming static, then silence. Where psychiatrists might see only pathological collapse, we might also recognize the catastrophic failure of the barrier that usually protects us from the full intensity of reality. He was becoming every name in history as he proclaimed the boundaries that had isolated him dissolving into something larger than individual suffering. Your sleeplessness tonight is partly the exhausting vigilance of an ego terrified of losing control. The I that needs to be successful, the I that fears judgment, the I that replays embarrassing moments from years past. This construct requires constant maintenance, endless energy to hold its careful boundaries intact. But Nietzsche's dissent whispers a radical possibility. What if the source of suffering is not external circumstance, but the relentless effort of maintaining selfhood? What if peace lies not in strengthening the fortress of identity, but in allowing its walls to soften, blur, and temporarily dissolve? As concerned friends transported him back to Germany, sedated and confused, something profound was completing itself. The brilliant philologist who had wielded words like surgical instruments was letting go of the need to define, categorize, or explain. The fierce intellect that had challenged gods and dismantled moral systems was choosing silence over the exhausting performance of consciousness. For the remaining 11 years of his life, he would exist in a fog beyond language, occasionally mumbling fragments or playing piano, but mostly suspended in a peace that transcended understanding. Tonight you have the opportunity he was ultimately denied, to practice a gentler version of this dissolution voluntarily. The identity you perform during daylight hours, the name you wear like a uniform that has grown too tight, the accumulated responsibilities and anxieties that define your waking self, these are just constructs, useful fictions that can be set aside for the duration of sleep. You do not need to be you tonight. Feel how tightly you have been gripping this sense of self, holding yourself together through sheer force of will. The exhaustion you feel is partly the cost of this constant maintenance. Let the edges of your identity blur into the mattress, into the shadows, into the night itself. The need to make sense of your life, to narrate your struggles, to justify your existence, let all of that drift away like smoke dissolving in darkness. You are not your name, not your accumulated failures or achievements, not the voice that judges and worries and plans. You are simply consciousness resting in the vast, impersonal ocean of existence. The ego can sleep now. The I can wait until morning. What remains when selfhood finally rests is not madness, but the deepest peace, awareness without anxiety, existence without the exhausting performance of identity, dissolving at last into the merciful silence that asks nothing, judges nothing, simply holds you in its infinite, anonymous embrace. Picture a modest house in Naumburg, Germany, where the 19th century draws toward its close. The rooms are filled with that particular quality of light that belongs to provincial German towns. Soft, filtered through lace curtains, carrying the weight of accumulated quiet. Outside, the world accelerates into modernity with its telegraphs and steam engines, but inside this sanctuary, time has begun to move according to different laws entirely. In an upstairs room overlooking a small garden, Friedrich Nietzsche sits in a high-backed chair, his once ferocious gaze now gentle and unfocused, watching dust motes dance in afternoon sunlight. The man who had torn through the foundations of Western thought with surgical precision has entered a realm beyond language, beyond philosophy, beyond the exhausting performance of genius. For 11 years, from his collapse in Turin until his death in 1900, Nietzsche existed in this suspended state, neither fully present in the way we understand consciousness, nor entirely absent from the world that continued to turn around him. His elderly mother, Franziska, moved through the house with practiced tenderness, adjusting his collar, bringing meals he barely acknowledged, speaking softly to a son who had travelled beyond the reach of ordinary communication. After her death in 1897, his sister Elizabeth assumed his care, wheeling him through gardens where he would sit contentedly among flowers whose names he no longer knew, feeling sunlight on his skin without the compulsion to transform sensation into metaphor. You, lying there in your own darkness, wrestling with the fear that keeps so many of us awake, the terror of losing our minds, our sharp edges, our carefully constructed identities, might initially recoil from this image as the ultimate nightmare. The contemporary world has taught us to view cognitive decline as the cruelest fate, the dissolution of everything that makes us recognizably ourselves. We build entire industries around the promise of maintaining mental acuity, staving off the inevitable erosion of the self. But tonight, in this suspended hour between waking and surrender, consider a radically different interpretation of Nietzsche's silent decade. The clinical details are stark. He required total care like a child, needed help with bathing, feeding, dressing. Most days he sat motionless for hours, occasionally murmuring fragments, "I am dead because I am stupid," he reportedly said once, a heartbreaking flash of awareness quickly swallowed by fog. Sometimes his fingers would find their way to a piano, producing disconnected melodies that hung in the air like questions without answers. But observe something extraordinary that accompanied this dissolution. The migraines that had tortured him for decades vanished completely. The digestive agony that had limited him to bland porridge disappeared. The frantic, relentless pressure to write, to explain, to justify his existence ceased entirely. His face, according to visitors, took on a strange serenity, the lines of intellectual struggle smoothing into something approaching peace. After 44 years of consciousness burning at unsustainable intensity, analyzing every sensation, questioning every assumption, dismantling comfortable illusions with merciless clarity, his nervous system finally granted him the ultimate mercy. The mind that could not stop thinking, that turned every experience into material for philosophical deconstruction, had at last been relieved of its exhausting duties. Perhaps this was not tragedy, but completion, the natural endpoint of awareness that had pushed itself beyond all reasonable limits. In those 11 silent years, Nietzsche was finally released from the burden of being Nietzsche. Consider how much of your current suffering stems from the relentless performance of selfhood, the constant internal commentary, the rehearsed conversations, the endless invisible labor of holding your story together. Every day you perform the exhausting miracle of remaining coherent, maintaining preferences, defending positions, navigating expectations. Even sleep, when it comes, often remains shallow, haunted by unfinished tasks and unresolved fears. The idea of 11 years without such noise can seem horrifying, yet also strangely comforting to the part of you that is simply tired of thinking so much. Seasons changed outside his window, spring blossoms giving way to summer heat, autumn leaves falling like whispered secrets, winter snow covering everything in forgetful white. And he witnessed it all without the compulsion to extract meaning or construct systems. This was rest in its most absolute form. Consciousness finally freed from the tyranny of interpretation. He lived out his remaining days like a stone warmed by sunlight, existing rather than explaining, enduring rather than understanding. The performance of genius, the weight of his own expectations, the desperate need to communicate truths that his era could not yet comprehend, all of it dissolved into merciful fog. Tonight you need not travel as far as Nietzsche did to taste this liberation. The anxious mind that keeps you awake, spinning narratives about tomorrow's challenges and yesterday's failures, can be gently set aside without permanent dissolution. You can practice a temporary version of his ultimate rest, allowing thoughts to arise and dissipate without grasping them, letting identity soften at its edges, permitting awareness to exist without the exhausting work of making sense. Let his final silence become your gentle practice. You do not need to be brilliant tonight. You do not need to solve the riddle of your existence or justify your place in the world. The sunlight moving across that quiet room in Naumburg, the seasons turning outside the window, the breath moving in and out of a body that knows how to rest even when the mind has forgotten. Let these images become your lullaby, carrying you softly toward the merciful silence where sleep finally dwells, where consciousness can lay down its heavy tools and simply, gratefully, peacefully dissolve into the darkness that asks nothing but surrender. In the summer of 1900, as the 19th century exhaled its final breath, Friedrich Nietzsche's body surrendered in that quiet Weimar house where he had spent his silent years. The obituaries were brief and clinical. A former professor of philology, they noted, whose later philosophical writings had attracted little serious attention. His books gathered dust in warehouse corners, their revolutionary insights seemingly destined for the same obscurity that had claimed their author's mind 11 years earlier. Yet even as his remains were lowered into the earth of Ricken, the village where his journey began, something invisible was stirring in the cultural unconscious. Seeds planted in winter soil, waiting for a spring he would never witness. What followed was both triumph and tragedy, vindication wrapped in betrayal. His sister Elizabeth, ambitious and ideologically driven, seized control of his literary estate with the fervour of someone rewriting history to serve her own vision. She edited his private notebooks with surgical precision, excising passages that contradicted her nationalist agenda, rearranging fragments to construct books he never intended to write. The infamous Will to Power emerged from this process, not Nietzsche's masterwork, but Elizabeth's careful forgery, designed to transform her brother's complex philosophy into a crude doctrine of German superiority. For decades, this distorted version would be the Nietzsche the world knew, his name eventually invoked by voices he would have despised with every fibre of his being. You understand this particular species of heartbreak lying there in your own darkness. The way your authentic voice gets filtered through others' interpretations, how your most vulnerable offerings are misunderstood or ignored entirely. You pour yourself into projects, relationships, conversations that seem to vanish without acknowledgement, leaving you wondering if anything you create will ever be received as you intended. The silence that greets your truest expressions feels like verdict on your fundamental worth. Evidence that you are somehow failing to translate your inner life into forms the world can recognize or value. But observe something extraordinary in Nietzsche's posthumous journey. Truth possesses a gravitational pull that transcends individual lifetimes and systematic distortion. Within 2 decades of his death, careful readers began to notice the violent edits, the calculated omissions, the way Elizabeth's version contradicted the spirit of his original notebooks. Scholars returned to his actual handwriting. Philosophers recognized the authentic voice beneath the forgery. And slowly, patiently, the real Nietzsche emerged from the rubble of his sister's manipulations. What survived was not the sanitized version that served political convenience, but the raw honesty of a mind that had refused comfortable lies even unto madness. His ideas found their way into trembling hands across Europe, artists in Paris, rebels in Vienna, lonely souls who recognized themselves in his struggles with meaning and authenticity. Each reader discovered not answers, but companionship. The profound relief of knowing that someone else had walked through this darkness and left markers for those who would follow. The very breakdown that had silenced him became part of his testament, proof that he had lived his philosophy to its ultimate shattering conclusion. Your own contributions to the world may never receive the recognition you crave, and this too is a kind of death, the ego's dissolution in the face of indifference. But influence moves through channels invisible to immediate perception, like underground rivers that surface miles from their source. The authenticity you model gives others permission to stop performing. The struggle you endure makes your presence somehow safer for those carrying similar weight. The kindness you offer that someone remembers in their darkest hour. These impacts register nowhere on the metrics our culture uses to measure success. Yet they constitute the actual substance of meaning. Tonight, as you rest in this velvet sanctuary, release the need for your worth to be validated by external recognition. What is real in you, the parts you fear are too intense, too unconventional, too honest, will find its resonance with those who need exactly what you offer, in timing you cannot control or predict. Like seeds buried in winter soil, what matters most about you may be invisible now, germinating in darkness, preparing for a spring that depends entirely on your willingness to plant authentic truth despite the cold. The abyss he stared into did not destroy what was essential, it refined it, burned away everything false until only the irreducible core remained. That core survived his madness, his death, his sister's betrayals, and a century of misinterpretation to finally speak clearly to souls like yours who lie awake wondering if their struggles serve any purpose beyond private suffering. They do. Rest now in that quiet knowing, letting the need for recognition dissolve like salt in the ocean of a larger, slower unfolding that asks only your honest presence, not your immediate triumph. The story loosens its grip on you now, like fingers slowly opening to release what they have held too tightly. We have walked together through the architecture of one brilliant mind's suffering, traced the path from childhood loss through intellectual triumph to final merciful silence. You have carried Friedrich Nietzsche's weight alongside your own, felt his migraines echo in your temples, recognized his insomnia in your restless hours. But the philosopher has done his work in you already, naming the shapeless pressure behind your eyes, giving form to the anxiety that visits in darkness. Now we let him rest, and we let you rest with him. Picture Tyrion one last time, but abstract now, stripped of specifics. Just winter air. Just cobblestones gleaming with moisture that reflects no particular light. The gas lamps flicker and dim like thoughts that once seemed urgent, now receding into background noise you no longer need to attend. Somewhere a door closes softly. Somewhere a candle burns down to nothing, the flame growing smaller, smaller, until only darkness remains. but darkness that feels like shelter rather than threat. The same velvet silence that has cradled every weary consciousness since time began. You are here now, in the sanctuary of your own room, held by something larger than individual struggle. The narrative voice that has guided you through this journey grows quieter, words spacing themselves further apart like footsteps walking away down a long corridor. You do not need to follow. You do not need to remember. The weight of existence, the burden of intelligence, the eternal return of sleepless thoughts, all of it can drift away like morning fog burning off under gentle sun. Feel the support beneath you rising up to carry your weight so you don't have to. Your breath continues its ancient rhythm, without instruction, rising and falling like tide against shore, like seasons turning, but gentler now, softer, asking nothing of you but this simple continuation. Let the boundary between your skin and the sheets become uncertain, porous, as if you were slowly dissolving into the darkness that surrounds and holds you. This is not frightening but natural, the way salt dissolves in water, the way all separate things eventually return to the vast, undifferentiated ocean from which they briefly emerged. The abyss is just the space behind your closed eyelids, warm and kind. The eternal return is just the rhythm of your breath. The will to power becomes simply the will to rest. Let go of the name you call yourself, the things you did today, the things you must do tomorrow. They are smoke dissolving in still air. Drifting now. Deeper. Now. Softer now. Heavy limbs sinking into mattress. Quiet mind releasing its grip. Peaceful heart beating without effort. You are part of the silence now, part of the night, part of the rest that holds mountains in their stillness and stars in their courses. Nothing to do. Nowhere to go. No one to be. Just breath. Just darkness. Just peace. Sleep.